So I can start now?
No, just a minute. Дорогие друзья, доброе утро. Сегодня у нас самый интересный день, пожалуй. Сегодня день Кантонского. Это не значит, что остальные дни были не очень интересные, но сегодня у нас просто что-то. И начинаем мы с совершенно невероятного выступления. Такого человека редко встречаешь живьем. Потрясающий специалист, автор, создатель, вот буквально создатель Кантонского корпуса по фильмам середины 20 века. Сейчас профессор Энди Чин расскажет вам, как он это сделал и как можно использовать этот корпус в процессе обучения и преподавания Кантонского. Но я вам честно скажу, как пользователь этого корпуса, это что-то невероятное. Это новое слово в создании корпусов. Если вы это не пропустили, вы молодец. Я вам гарантирую, вы не пожалеете. Это будущее корпусов. With great pleasure and great honor, I want to introduce you Энди Чин, the head, right? The head of the Department of Linguistics and Modern Language Studies. And his big project, Corpus of Cantonese of mid-20th century. Andy, please, your turn.
All right. Thank you very much for your kind introduction and also your invitation. I think it's a very meaningful and interesting event because it's very rare to have an occasion with so many Chinese dialects involved in one single event. So I'm quite happy to be here to be one of the speakers. The only pity is that I cannot fly to Russia to visit your university and also to visit Russia. But anyway, I think the technology nowadays allows us to have this kind of exchange without any boundary limitation. So this section is on the Yue dialects, and I will talk about, as Alina mentioned, a project that I has been working on in the past few years. That is a corpus of Cantonese, Hong Kong Cantonese to be more specific. And as you can see from the slide, the title slide, the corpus name is the corpus of mid-20th century Hong Kong Cantonese. And I will, in this talk, I will share with you the rationales, the reasons, and the way how I constructed this corpus. And then I will show you some data to understand how the corpus data can become useful materials for teaching and learning Cantonese. In the big data era, big data, I think it becomes a fancy and buzzword nowadays, and we live in such an era with using a lot of computer technology. And also for language studies or linguistic analysis, we also rely on a lot of big data, because you cannot just rely on one single informant or just a few informants' data. You want to have a big pool of data so that the data or the conclusions you derive, the analysis you do with the data can be more objective and more logical. So I will talk about how this can be done by drawing on the examples from my corpus. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Andy Чин, and my Chinese name is Qian Zhian in Putonghua, and in Cantonese it is pronounced as Qin Ji Ngon. And I'm now working at the Department of Linguistics and Modern Language Studies of the Education University of Hong Kong. As you can see from this slide, the picture is our campus picture. It's a very quiet and spacious place, even though it is a little bit inaccessible because it is at the top of a mountain. So it's not quite accessible, but still it's fine. And I was trained as a linguist. I received my first, all my degrees related to linguistics. But in particular, I'm also interested in social linguistics. For example, when we use our language, we all know that human language is used for communication. So we are interested in knowing how people talk to each other to convey their meanings. So there are many social variables that can govern the use of the language. So I'm interested in that. And besides that, I'm also interested in corpus linguistics, how to use the data to mine the data, how to mine the data to help us to understand the language better. And I'm also interested in linguistic typology to compare the language I'm working on, like Cantonese or Chinese in general, with other languages like English, Japanese, or other world languages. And also, I'm also working on linguistic change because we all know that language is not a static system, it's a dynamic system in the sense that it keeps changing, evolving over time. So we are interested in knowing how the language we're speaking today, how it differs from the language spoken maybe 20 years ago or in our parents or grandparents' generations. So as you can see later on, the corpus I constructed actually are related to these research interests. Now, some notes about the language or the variety I'm going to talk about, Cantonese. Cantonese is just one of the varieties of the Yue dialect groups. Probably you know that usually we have, in the traditional way, we divide all the dialects in Chinese into 7 major dialect groups. But nowadays we come to have 9 or even 10 dialect groups. And Cantonese is one of the members of the Yue dialect groups, and is usually considered the standard and also the representative variety of this dialect group. And it's mainly spoken in Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou, Guangxi, and also overseas communities. When people migrate to other places, like in the US, in Canada, or in Malaysia and Singapore, they also bring along the language they spoke. And in Hong Kong, it is considered or is usually known as the lingua franca in Hong Kong, meaning that people, no matter what dialects they speak originally, like Hokkien or Chaozhou or even Shanghainese, when they stay in Hong Kong, usually they have to switch to Hong Kong. And Cantonese is usually used as the language you use in when you go shopping, when you in media, also in the government settings, etc., etc. According to the census data collected by the Hong Kong government, around 90% of the population in Hong Kong speak Cantonese as the home language. And also, we all know that Cantonese is quite different from modern standard Chinese and Putonghua in terms of phonology, grammar, as well as the semantics. And I think later on, Professor Tang Si-Wing will talk more about these differences. Now, this is the map. This is the picture I took from the Language Atlas of China, published in 1988. This map shows the distributions of the major dialect groups in the southeastern coastal region. As you can see on this map, this green area represents the Yue dialect groups, the Yue dialects. So it's mainly in the southernmost of the on the Chinese territory. Now, let me turn to the corpus that I'm going to talk about. The name of the corpus is called the Corpus of Mid-20th Century Hong Kong Cantonese, and this slide gives you the front page of the corpus. I will show you the URL, the website, later on. As you can see on this front page of the corpus, there are 2 buttons at the bottom showing that the corpus has 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was launched in 2012, around 8 years ago, as a pilot study in my university. And later on, I got more funding from the government to develop phase 2 of the corpus. And the phase 2 of the corpus was launched around 2 months ago. And they are now open for access and is free of charge. And you can just go there and then get an account. You need to register, but it's free. Now, when you look at the name of the corpus, you will notice that we have the time mid-20th century. So many people may wonder, or the first question you pop up in your mind is, why do I choose mid-20th century as the time point I want to work on. Why do I focus on this period of time, not other periods of time? Why not contemporary Cantonese or 21st century Cantonese? Is there any reason, or is it just a random choice of the time period? These are the questions I'm going to answer. So the question here would be, why mid-20th century? Is there a reason for that? Now, to answer this question, we need to review a little bit the studies of Cantonese, the Cantonese dialect. This slide shows you some of the very representative and important work published on Cantonese studies. In fact, the studies of Cantonese, I would say, started back to the 1970s. So it has only a history of around 40 or 50 years only. And over the past 4 decades, we have seen quite a number of important reference works published on Cantonese studies, but many of them focus on the synchronic aspect of the dialects, meaning that they give you the updated information about a particular variety of the Yue dialects, or maybe Hong Kong Cantonese in general. So with these reference works, we are able to tell, or we are able to know more about the grammar, the phonology of Cantonese in general. So these are very important and also provide us with the foundation knowledge for understanding the Cantonese dialect. So that's why I say they are works on the synchronic studies of Cantonese. But at the same time, we also discovered or dig up a lot of early textual materials on Cantonese, which allows us to conduct diachronic studies of Cantonese. For example, on this slide, you see 2 book pictures of the early textual materials on Cantonese. The left-hand side, vocabulary on the Canton dialect was published in 1828 by Robert Morrison, one of the very famous Western missionaries. And this work is usually known as the earliest extant record of the Cantonese dialects, 1828. So that is about 190 years ago. And on the right is a Chinese text. Actually, it is an annotation of the Book of Odes, Shi Jing, but the annotation was written in Cantonese of the time. And according to some scholars' analysis, this work was published in 1893. So these works are very important because they vividly capture the language, the Cantonese language, spoken hundreds some years ago. All right. So with these early textual materials, we are able to reconstruct the early stage of the Cantonese language. That is about 200 years ago. So we know better what the phonology is, how the grammar is, and in fact, many scholars, including I myself, make use of these materials to analyze the grammar of early Cantonese. Some of the structures that scholars work on include yes, no question, something like "Are you coming?" This kind of question, directional complements, aspect markers, demonstratives, phonology, verb complements, comparative construction, "I'm taller than you," this kind of construction, lexicon in general from the social linguistic perspective. So through the lexicon, you may know what kind of things people pay attention to at that time. Dative verb give, how it becomes the dative marker and also the passive marker. Sentence final particles, which is a very important category in Cantonese, and also grammar of the Latin period by using these texts. So this is very important because we have some hard evidence, I would say, hard evidence to know how the language was spoken in the past. Now, this slide shows you a time axis summarizing how the diachronic studies of Cantonese was conducted. As I mentioned before, Morrison's work, 1828, was the earliest extant text. and now we are at 2020, right? But when I went through all those works, analysis of Cantonese with reference to those early textual materials, I find that those scholars make use of the text from Morrison down to Y.R. Zhao's 1947 Cantonese primer. And that covers already 120 years of time. So meaning that with those texts from 1828 to 1947, we are able to understand better the evolution, the development of Cantonese over 120 years. But from 1947 to now, we have already gone through another 70 some years. But I did not see any people, any scholars use any textual materials after 1947 to do diachronic analysis of Cantonese. So it's very interesting. One possible reason is that maybe they think that they can rely on informants rather than textual evidence. Because from 1947 to 2020, only 73 years, you can find an informant of 80 years old. You can check with the informants, and then you can have some ideas about the language of 1950s or 1940s. So that's why we don't see many scholars using any published materials to do diachronic studies of Cantonese of the past 60 or 70 years. So what I was suggesting, or what I'm thinking, is that, well, why don't we try to collect some hard evidence, actual language spoken, recorded, and collected in mid-20th century to supply more data for understanding the evolution of Cantonese. So that's the idea why I think mid-20th century is a critical time point. But at the same time, there is another important observation based on those early studies of diachronic development of Cantonese. That is, some linguistic changes are found to take place or completed around the mid-20th century. That is 1940s, 1950s. There are at least two, as far as I know. The first one is dative marker. In the old day, when you check those materials published in 19th century, you find that the dative marker was guo, meaning to pass. But in modern Cantonese, we don't use guo anymore. We use bei. So it would be something like 送本書過佢 in the past, in the old day, but now we say 送本書俾佢. So the dative marker switches from guo to bei. And the other change, in another linguistic change, is the yes-no question. In the old day, in the past, we have the affirmative first, 去睇戲, go watch movie, and then we have the negation, But nowadays, we have the affirmative and negative going together first, followed by the so-called object. So it is quite different. But the most important observation is that for these kind of changes, they took place or completed around the mid-20th century. So my hypothesis is that the language, the Cantonese language of mid-20th century would contain both new and old features, or new and old features coexisted in mid-20th century Hong Kong Cantonese. This is very important and also very exciting for social linguists or for those who are interested in linguistic change, because with the new and old features coexisting in the language, you are able to observe or to work out the conditions or even the mechanisms of the change. What is left or what has already undergone change, or what has not yet changed. These are something that we can try to work out. Now, let me show you some examples from my corpus. I haven't talked about the source of my data, but if you look at this slide, you will see that the source of my corpus data comes from those old movies, black and white movies of Cantonese produced in mid-20th century. Now, here I show you one example from one of the movies, 啟爺驗試, produced in 1952. Here we have the first yes-no question, 你位千金有讀書冇啊? Meaning, has your daughter studied before? All right. Now, if you don't know Chinese, or it doesn't matter, because you can compare these two yes/no questions by looking at the color scheme I put here. So in the first question, you have the affirmative in red, followed by the object in green, and then the yellow one, the negative marker. All right. But in the second yes/no question, we have the affirmative in red, and then we have the negation in yellow, followed by the object in green. So you see the order of these three items are different in these two yes/no questions. The first one represents the old structure. The second one represents the modern structure. So meaning that in the same movie, we find both old form and new form, simply speaking. But another important observation is that these two forms, old form and new form, were produced by the same speaker, same actor in the same movie. So meaning that the same guy used two structures, the old one and also the new one in the same movie. So these are something that we are interested in, or we are very excited about. Now here I show you two more examples of the old form with the affirmative, the object, and then the negation. And let's take a look at the third one here. Can you see something unusual or special for this third question? You see that there are two items highlighted in yellow, which is the negation marker. And what you can see is that these negation markers appears twice in the third question. In the first case, in the first instance is right after the affirmative marker, while the second instance is toward the end. So what does it mean? It actually shows that both new forms and old forms coexist in the same question. This is a very, very rare example we can find from the corpus. It's very, very unusual. You can say that this is ungrammatical, a very special or very strange utterance, but if you understand the development of the yes/no question from the old form to the new form, you will find it very logical to have this kind of superimposed structure in the language. So after answering the question why we think mid-20th century is a very critical time point, then the next question is we need to look for the corpus data. There are two ways to collect some data from the past, the real-time approach or the apparent time approach. For the apparent time approach, it would be something like you try to consult some old informants. For example, you go to interview some old informants like those with at the 80 years old or 70 years old, and then you assume that their language is more or less the same as the language of their childhood time. But this one, of course, is not very reliable because you cannot always, it's not guaranteed that they are speaking the same language, right, as of their, childhood. So I propose that we better to look for real-time data. Real-time in the sense that the data we're going to collect were actually produced, recorded, and spoken in the time we are interested in, that is mid-20th century. And also, of course, the data has to be authentic and natural as much as possible. So that with all these attributes and parameters, that reminds me of the movies that I watched when I was young. According to some surveys, some studies of film production industry in Hong Kong, within 10 years of time, around 3,000 such movies were produced in mid-20th century. 3,000 movies in 10 years. On average, it means 300 some movies per year. And we have only 365 days per year. So what does it mean? It means almost one day, one movie. That is the industry, the movie industry in Hong Kong back to mid-20th century. So the fast production of the movies can also suggest that the movies, the dialogues in the movies would be something like ad hoc or improvised, in the sense that they are not well written beforehand. So it's unlike drama, the actors may not have the time to memorize every single characters of the script. Probably they just have some suggestions or some hints there written on the script, and then they have to improvise. So meaning that the data, the language or the speech they produce are quite natural and authentic. So that with all these background, it leads us to propose a corpus of mid-20th century Hong Kong Cantonese. But when you build a corpus, it takes time because it is not just a collection of data, especially for Cantonese or dialects. You have to record the speech because the dialect itself is usually rendered in the spoken form. So what you need to do is you have to collect the speech samples, speech data, but you cannot directly work on the speech data, right? You cannot just listen to the audio files and then do the analysis. It is better for you to convert all these speech data into something like machine readable format. That means you have to type it out. So we have to undergo a process of transcription. You have to transcribe the speech data into text. But after that, you still have to do a lot of things like word segmentation, because in Chinese, including its dialects, there is no segmentation, unlike English or European languages. So you need to do segmentation, and after that, depending on your needs, whether you also want to do annotation. You want to assign each segmented word with, for example, parts of speech, a noun, a verb, an adjective, or a preposition. Well, nobody said that you have to do this, but if you have this kind of information, it will facilitate your analysis. For example, when you have the item 过, it can be a dative marker, as I mentioned. It could be an aspect marker, and it could be just a verb. If you don't have any annotation, you don't distinguish them, you just lump all these 过 as one unit, then you cannot distinguish their usages. So you have a lot of work, and you don't want to waste your time. So before you start, you have to check whether similar corpora already exist in the market, so to speak. So you want to know whether someone has already done something similar. So at that time, I tried to survey the corpora, what kind of corpora of Cantonese are available. Now, these are the existing Cantonese corpora that I know of when I started to propose, when I proposed my corpus. As you can tell from the names of some of these corpora, you will find that they have nothing to do with mid-20th century. For example, the first two, they are related to child language. Okay, and for the number 3, number 4, and number 6, they are based on contemporary Cantonese. Well, at least Cantonese of 1990s. And for the 5th one, 19th century Cantonese, as you can tell, is about early Cantonese, back to 19th century. So there's no Cantonese corpus that matches the theme that I propose. So meaning that it's good, I can go on, right? If someone has already done something, I should not work on my own, right? I can just make use of other people's work. Now, besides collecting the data, build the corpus, we also have to make sure that the data can be available to the general public for them to search, to download the data, at least to copy down the data for further analysis. Because we cannot just keep the data ourselves. If you just keep the data yourself, you cannot do everything, right? Different people have different interests. So it would be good if you want to maximize the benefits of your corpus. It would be good if you can make it accessible on the internet, and also to have a user-friendly search engine so that people can search the data with your search engine and download the data for their own analysis. Now here on this slide, I show you the interface, the search engine interface of the 19th century Cantonese corpus developed by Professor Samuel Zheng and Professor Karin Yu at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Now, after all these background work, I started to ask my university to support me as a pilot study, and luckily I got some funding from the university. And with 1 year of time, we launched the corpus in 2012, the phase 1 of the corpus. And the data we now provide on the internet through the search engine is the data of 14 black and white movies. We transcribed 21 movies, but only 14 of them were processed. And these 14 movies made up a total of around 200,000 characters. And we have around 3,000 registered users up to now, after 8 years of time. Now, this is the interface of the first phase of the corpus. After you get an account, you log in, you will enter this page, and you can click on our character list or word list, and then you can see all the words, segmented words, and all the characters, and then you can click on any of them to go further to check out the data. Or if you have something in your mind, you can just type it here, type in the box. You can type the Chinese characters, or you can use the romanization. We use the Yuping format. So you can just type it, because sometimes you may not know which graph we use to transcribe the word you are interested in. So you can use the romanization, pinyin, to help you to search. Now, this slide shows you the search result of cha, tea, all right? So this shows you there are 14 words containing the character cha. So like yam cha, drink tea, cha, tea, ham cha, afternoon tea, gai cha, chicken tea, zam cha, serve tea, and then we have other sampo cha, so tea from the daughter-in-law, etc., etc. Now, here on the right column, you see the occurrences, how many times these word occurs in our corpus, and you can click on check examples to go further to check out the utterances and also the source of the utterance, which movie it comes from and who speaks that utterance. Now, after this, after we launched the first phase, then we apply for a bigger grant from the government to expand our corpus. And luckily, in 2013, we received a grant from the Hong Kong government to expand the corpus. And now we have 60 movies. Okay, so 3 times more than the first phase. And the movies came from 1943 to 1970. So, and the number of characters is around 800,000 characters. Well, of course, if you compare with Google, those online, cloud drive, and of course, 800,000 characters is not really big in that sense, right? But still, for Cantonese corpus, I think it's already big enough. And this time we use the ELAN to transcribe our data, because ELAN is a tool developed by the Max Planck Institute of Psycholinguistics in the Netherlands, which allows you to annotate sound files and audio and video files. So if we are able to link the utterance, the transcript we transcribe, the utterances we transcribe with the video. So that's why this time we are able to extract, to tell you, whenever you find an utterance, we can also show you the video. All right, so then you can listen and also even watch how the utterance was made. And also for data processing, besides segmentation, Yuping assignment, we also have the POS tagging, so the parts of speech tagging. And we have around more than 300 speakers. So we try to keep, to have as many speakers as possible. Now, this is the search interface of our second phase of the corpus. We can have some demonstration later on. And these are the list of tags of the POS tags. So we have adjective, adverb, aspect marker, classifier, conjunction, determiner, idiom, interjection, noun, number, onomatopoeia, particle, preposition, pronoun, punctuation, sentence final particles, verb, and unclassified, something we can't classify. Now this is the ELAN platform, and you can see that for each utterance we can locate its start time and also the end time in the movie. So that's why now whenever we extract this utterance, we are able to extract the relevant video segment as well. So you can watch the video as well. Now in our corpus, in our database at the back end, for each of the utterance, it will be something like this. For each of the segmented word, we have the yuping and followed by the parts of speech. Okay, 加數, 加數, and now 完全, 完全, ever, etc., etc. So we have a longest utterance like this. 而家先煮飯啦，你送去和合。All right. Now, so these are the backgrounds and also some brief introduction about the data in the corpus. Now, what I'm going to show you to talk about in my second part of the presentation is the applications of Hong Kong Cantonese corpus, our corpus in teaching and learning Cantonese. Now, as a general spoken corpus, our corpus is good for studying not just the grammar of Cantonese and also the early stage of Cantonese. And also because of the dialogic and interactive nature of the data, it is good for us to do discourse analysis actually, right? Because they're highly interactive. But at the same time, when we further analyze our data, we begin to see that, well, actually we can try to make good use of the data for Cantonese language learning and teaching. Because even though you may say that, well, Andy, your data is quite outdated, it comes from 1950s and 60s, some of the vocabularies are already, have already phased out. Right, exactly, you are right. But at the same time, we also have a lot of examples, a lot of words that are still actively used nowadays, especially those functional words. Now, let me give you an example. The aspect marker, the perfective aspect marker, 左, we have 3,000 some examples in our corpus. 3,000 occurrences of 左, the perfective aspect marker. And I don't think you can find a comparable amount of data examples in other textbooks, dictionaries, or other language resources. So what I mean is, if you want to look for data for illustration, for teaching, or to compile your learning materials, I think our corpus could be a good starting point. What I want to highlight here is that our corpus is not directly, itself is not a learning materials or a textbook resources, but the data inside can help you to compile your learning materials. Okay. So for example, corpus has another advantage, that is it can provide you some quantitative data, which dictionaries or textbooks cannot provide. Now, for example, when you want to learn a language, you sometimes ask the question, how many words or how many characters should I learn? Or what are the top 20 common words in this language? And what are some common sentence final particles? For example, in Cantonese, we are very we have a lot of sentence final particles. So if you want to teach sentence final particles, which one should you teach first? Now, if you don't have a corpus like this, if you just go out to ask 10 tutors of Cantonese, you may have 10 different answers. If you ask them the top one, the first sentence final particles they will teach, probably they will give you 10 different answers because they have their own choice, they have their own experience or preference. But with corpus like this, we are able to come up with a more objective and more logical list for you to make reference to. I'm not saying that ours is the authoritative one, but at least it gives you such information. Okay. Now this chart gives you the coverage of our corpus in terms of characters. Now, if you we said that our corpus have around 800,000 characters, but that refers to the tokens. That is the total amount of characters. But if you try to calculate or to count the distinct character, that is character types, our corpus has only around 3,700 character types. So meaning that the 3,700 distinct characters, some of them, were repeatedly used, and all these 3,700 characters made up 800,000 corpus. Now, if you look at this curve, what it shows is that if you want to have a coverage of 0.5, that is 50% of the corpus, actually you don't need 1,000 something, even though the whole corpus has 3,700 character types, distinct characters. If you want to have 50% of coverage, you don't need 1,000 something actually. If you look at this list, it's less than 60. If you want to have a 90% of coverage, it's around 520 something. So this chart, this table gives you a better idea. Out of the 3,700 characters, if you want to have a coverage of 30%, the top 16 characters means the high frequency one. And if you want to have 50%, then 50 characters. So can you imagine, out of the 3,700 characters, if you extract the top 50 characters, these 50 characters already cover 50% of the corpus. If you want to have 90%, you just need 546 out of 3,700. So that means the remaining 3,200 are, you don't have to learn it. But to put it the other way, or let me put it this way, what we can provide you with our corpus is that if you want to work out the top, for example, you want to teach your students the top words, you can come to our corpus and I can extract maybe the first 200 characters or the first 200 words. These are the common words that people usually use in their conversations. Now, don't forget, in these movies, the topics in the movies are usually related to the daily life, right? Those are not academic presentations. They are not courtroom discussions. No, those movies are very, very based on daily life situations. So the characters or the words they use are very colloquial and also close to our daily situation. So this chart, you can get it from our corpus website. Actually, it shows you the top 10 words in our corpus. So the first word is "你," the pronoun "you," and then "我," "I," and then "係," the copula verb, and then the negation marker and then the sentence final particle "are," and then pronoun 佢, third person pronoun, and then we have 咁, the pronoun, and then we have 嚟, the verb, and then the classifier. So it gives you an idea, okay? Now this table shows you the top 10 nouns and top 10 verbs, as well as the top 10 sentence final particles. So I think they are very indicative and very useful if you really want to compile or to teach your students. You have some guidance or some examples here. Now, another thing that we try to work out before is to extract 4-gram expressions or 4-character chunks. Now, when people think about here the term 4-character chunks, they may think about idioms, right? Well, but no, we are not talking about idioms here. We are talking about every 4 characters as a unit. And you will see that some of these are very interesting. Something like 咩事啊, okay, 咩事 plus the sentence final is the top one. And then we have another 話俾你聽, I'm telling you, and 千祈唔好, and then 如果唔係, and 做咩嘢啫? Now these are the things that textbooks will never tell you. Because these are not words, these are phrases or even clauses. Usually, they are not taught in the textbooks or not even included in dictionaries. But what we get here is that these are very high frequency collocations or combination in the corpus data. Now, some of them I would say are useful expressions, something like 如果唔係 and also 千祈唔好. I don't think the textbook will ever teach you this kind of thing. So I think with the corpus data, we are able to generate this kind of things, play around with these combinations, etc., etc. Another thing that learners of Cantonese or any language would like to learn to pick up is collocation. Now, when you have a target word, you always want to know, you want to learn about this word, right? How it is pronounced, the meaning of this word. But at the same time, you also want to know about its usage. So what kind of words it goes with, right? Maybe to the left-hand side or the right-hand side. Now, it all depends on the nature and the status of this target word. If it's a verb, if it is a verb, probably you may want to look at its right-hand side to see what kind of object it takes, right? If it's a noun, you may want to know on its left-hand side what kind of classifier it goes with, right? This is something you may want to know. You learn something like boy, the cup, and you want to know what kind of classifier it goes with. So you want to know the collocation on its left. And for verb, probably on its right, because you want to know about the object. So with our corpus search engine, you are able to do this kind of search. Now, this slide shows you the search engine. If you are interested in the verb 答 as a verb, and you want to see the noun after it, you don't specify which noun you want to check. You just want to specify the parts of speech. So with this kind of combination, you will get all these results. You have 搭下午車, 搭車, 搭台, 搭船, 搭線, 搭路, 搭飛機, 搭嘴, 搭單車尾, and also 搭單. So I think these are something that learners may want to know, and we hope that in future we are actually building a platform to see whether we can come up with this kind of web or map, okay, linking the verb with its objects and also with other verbs. So this on this slide we show you the examples of 食, to eat and to drink. And also the next slide we have 打電話, okay, 打電話. But at the same time, 打 we also have 打牌, playing mahjong, 打工, meaning going to work. But 電話 we also have another verb like 聽電話, 接電話, pick up the phone, listen to the phone, and also give the phone. 俾電話 means to call somebody. So we actually see that the words are related to each other to a certain extent, or with different kinds of combination. So we hope that the data, because in the textbook, it will teach you only the theoretical things like 打電話, but they can't tell you the frequency or which one occurs the most. For example, the verb 食, eat. In theory, anything that is edible can be its object, right? That is very logical. But without the corpus, you can't tell which edible item appears the most with the verb 食. So we hope that the corpus can give you this kind of information. For learners of Cantonese or any language, they cannot learn everything. You can't ask them to memorize everything. They can only start with something that is common in the language. And that's the way how corpus data can contribute. Now, when we look at our data again, corpus data, we find many interesting expressions that are commonly used nowadays in our daily life. Like this one, on the left-hand side, we have 2 character chunks like 好啦, 好啊, 好靚, 早唞, 早晨, 坐啦, 係啊, 係咩? On the right-hand side, we have some longer expressions. 老實話俾你聽啊, 而家佢又唔喺度, 你大可以放心啦，你去話俾佢聽啦，etc. etc. These are selected from our corpus based on some of our intuition as a native speaker. These are some very common expressions. So my assumption is that learners of Cantonese may want to learn these expressions as well. Not just individual words, individual characters, but also some very colloquial expressions that they need in their daily life communication. Now, with these sentences or expressions, we are developing an app for the learners to practice their Cantonese pronunciations. So we have some students recording their voices with all these words. And then with the romanization in Yuping format here, and they can listen to it, and then they try to match, do a simple matching. So they can listen to them, to this, and then match with it, hi, then they match here, and then they match. So they, on the one hand, they can enhance and practice their pronunciation, and also with the Yuping system, and also try to learn the expression as a whole, together with the meaning of these expressions. We are still developing this. Hopefully, after this summer, we are able to launch this app for learners to practice. So let me sum up what I have talked about so far. So I introduced the HKCC, Hong Kong Cantonese corpus, the mid-20th century Hong Kong Cantonese corpus, and I introduced to you the rationales and how it is constructed. And also I also briefly talk about the applications of the data in this corpus for teaching and learning Cantonese. Now, this is the website of our corpus. So if you have, you can bookmark it, and you can go there every time you want. It's now already available online for everybody in the internet world. All right. So I think I'll stop here, and I'm happy to take any questions and comments from the floor. Thank you very much.
Professor, just comments, because we have a little bit difference between your speech and hear it. Just 10 seconds, something like this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's broadcasting. It's a difficult question. Thank you very much. I have seen your presentations, and such a big difference already. Yeah, 2 months, right? In June, as far as I remember.
Right. When I launched the data, right? When I launched the data 2 months ago, I think you were in the workshop, right?
Yes, I were.
Yeah.
And you already have an app. That's great. You're already working with it, and I will be waiting as many others, because the problem of learning Cantonese is the apps, something like good apps and frequency lists and so on. Because for us, who we can speak Chinese, and it's much easier for us, but still it's difficult. We have to learn from the basis, from the very beginning, because pronunciation system is different.
Right.
Absolutely difficult. But for those who don't speak Mandarin, it's sometimes impossible. And apps, yes, and frequency lists, they can just highlight your spirit.
As I said, mine is not a textbook. Mine is not a dictionary or textbook, but a resource or some resources for the teachers to select items, or they can make reference to it if they want to know what are the common words in the language. And just go to our corpus, and then they can get the list, and then they decide whether they want to teach those items or not.
I think this is the next step in teaching, to actually not using textbooks or something like this, because any textbook is old at the moment when it's published. It's already old, outdated.
Right.
So, but you can't publish book in a month. It's very difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you can adjust something like this source very quick. You can use up-to-date any data.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
It's great, really. And I like it very much that you based on movies.
Right.
Because it's the real.
Exactly,
language.
exactly. And also the topics of these movies are very close to the daily life situations. They talk about dating between boys and girls,
Yeah.
family situations, detective stories, horror movies. Some of them are actually very interesting. So I think definitely the language we have from the corpus is quite close to the language actually spoken among the general public of that time.
I personally think that this is what we can call learning language using movies.
Right.
This is it.
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
not just watching. Maybe movies, your textbooks.
Yeah, exactly.
For your
Exactly.
Yeah. And you can, I'm waiting for questions. Дорогие коллеги, большое спасибо, что вы здесь сейчас с нами в это раннее утро субботнее. Но, пожалуйста, оставьте какие-нибудь вопросы, потому что иначе получается, что мы просто разговариваем друг с другом, а хотелось бы поговорить еще и с вами. Professor, there is a question from me again.
Okay.
You were talking about alt texts where we can search many things in grammar, those 200-year-old texts. But where can we look for them?
Well, unfortunately, many of them are kept. Sometimes we just find them accidentally. For example, someone visited the Harvard Yanjing library and they suddenly found one of the books I just mentioned, early Cantonese. So they make copies and then come back and then share among us. So we don't have a very good platform to catalog these early texts, because we know that some overseas university libraries, like I forgot which one, they do have some of these works put it online for people to access. But when they put the so-called the books or these materials online, they just scan the original book and put it online, and it's not searchable. So you cannot search within the text. You can just have a look at the book. This is the reason why I always emphasize that we better try our best to digitize all these early textual materials to make it like a corpus or searchable database, so that people can just type a word and then, these words appear in 5 of the text or 6 of the text, something like that.
Yeah, I'm definitely for digitalizing, because it's difficult for us to use any materials being here in Russia.
Yeah, right.
There.
But it takes time, because for example, different text. Just for my case, when I transcribe the movies, I think it's easier for us to standardize the way we transcribe them. We can decide this word is represented by a certain graph. I can make the decision. But if you try to convert those early texts, the printed work, into a digital format, they may have different ways of representing the colloquial characters. So you need to make a decision whether you follow them or you want to make a consistent graph across these materials.
Yeah. I do hope it will be.
It takes a lot of time, actually. It takes time.
Extra.
Yeah.
I think for 8 years, your corpus has just made a very big move, because it was like,
yes.
When I first saw it, was interesting, but I don't know how to use it. And my students, I made them use it, and they said, well, that's interesting, but I don't understand how to use it and why I should use it. But this second version, I have many ideas in mind how to use it. And
right.
I do like
hope the second phase is more useful and provide more info, because just like I mentioned, because we have the part of speech, so you can just search for anything of nouns, of the noun category. So you don't have to specify a particular word to search for.
Yes, yes, and I do hope that maybe after you finish your Cantonese studies, you can go further and for Mandarin perhaps, because there is no corpus based on movies for Mandarin.
Right, exactly. Because people usually go for something simple in the sense that for if they can grab the text directly from the internet, like newspapers or fictions, magazines, it's easy for you to copy and paste the text, right? But for spoken data like this, you have a lot of words you have to transcribe from the speech data into words, and that takes a lot of time. So I'm glad that I have a good RA to help you.
Even to hear about how you did it, it makes me, well, it's too difficult. It's really difficult. And we have a question. There is a chat. There are three backstage, and we have in stage. We have one question from Jesse. Can you look at it?
Sorry, where should I click? What should I click then?
Oh, there is a chat. There's event, stage, and backstage. You should go to stage.
I'm at stage, right?
Yes. No. So, I mean at the right. Can you see it? Are you on website? I can send you a print screen. Well, I just can copy and send it in WhatsApp. Okay.
Okay.
Do you see it? This is the question.
Okay. Advocacy for Cantonese learning, really in terms of angle of communities, I think the issue continue. Yes, exactly. I think a very good point about the pragmatic. So that is also the reason why I try to include to allow the users to watch the video segments of the utterances. Because if you just look at our transcript, you can only see the words, right? You can't tell how the speaker made the utterance, whether like in terms of the speed or in terms of the prosody, in terms of gestures, etc., etc. So that's also the reason why we use ELAN, the platform, to annotate our utterances in the movies, to link with the actual the videos. But the question we are facing now is about the copyright, because some of the movies are owned by a very big local TV company, and if we broadcast or we show the movie video segments to the users, somehow we have to pay them, and the amount of money is not cheap. So what we are going to do is probably we only show those movies that they don't have the copyright, so that we won't get into troubles with the company. But I totally agree with you. But it doesn't matter, because even though the movies cannot be shown due to copyright issue, our search results will give you the time frame, the time marker of the utterance. So you can go to download the movies yourself, and also to go to check the actual utterance in the movies, and then you will get the contextual information about the utterance, gesture, facial expressions, speed of the utterance, etc., etc. So I hope I answered your question. Yeah, you are absolutely right about the context. That's very important.
Yeah, and if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to text there here in stage section. So I do hope that Professor will be able to hold a little bit longer here.
Yeah, sure.
You know so much about, and how did it come to this idea to make this corpus?
As I said, because I have been working with Professor Benjamin Zhou you still remember him, the first speaker of the Cantonese school last year. He has a big corpus of modern Chinese based on the Chinese language of Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, Shanghai, Beijing, Taiwan. So I worked for him when I was an undergraduate student. So I began to get interest into corpus linguistics. So when I came back after my PhD studies, when I came back to Hong Kong, I began to see what kind of things that we can do for Cantonese. If you just rely on native speakers' intuition, like, for example, I'm a native speaker of Cantonese, of course, I can always make judgment. But that's only based on individual speakers' judgment, and you don't have large amount of data for you to, to generalize the patterns or to understand better how the language, how it evolves or whatever. So I think more has to be done, in terms of database or data structure. And also I mentioned, because mid-20th century is a very interesting time point in terms of the development of the Cantonese language. There are quite a number of changes that took place or completed around that time. And also, I recall that the movies I watched when I was a student back to the 1980s, they show all these movies every day in the midnight. So I think this is a valuable asset, a valuable pool of data. Many people only talk about their value in terms of movie production or culture or whatever, but they seldom talk about these movies in terms of its linguistic value.
Yeah, but it is a very good corpora. Yeah.
Okay. I hope people like it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I do hope that you will stay today for others. There will be Professor Tang and Professor Mandarich.
Right.
And I hope it won't be too late in Hong Kong now. And we say, we say good day. We say good evening for Hong Kong, and it's good day for us in Russia.
It's 3 p.m. only, still in the afternoon, but never mind.
That's great, and I do hope next time we will see you in Russia all by yourself.
Sure.
And always welcome, always welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your invitation. Great to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very interesting, and I really want to hear you again. So anytime you have other presentation or workshop, just let us know. It's so interesting. Everything I hear. Thank you very much. There are some thanks in Russian too, in our chat stage. So enjoy your Saturday.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend, everybody. All right.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Okay. See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.